Good afternoon. I'm Ralph Albert Thomas, the CEO and Executive Director of the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to this special Issues Watch broadcast. So let's get started. On November 2nd, New Jerseyans will go to the polls to vote for a governor, and all 120 seats in the legislature are up. This happens like every 6 years, I think, is the time frame of that. In the race for governor, incumbent Phil Murphy is being challenged by Republican candidate Jack Ciattarelli. Jack served from 2011 to 2018 as a state assemblyman for the 16th district, which is the district that I live in, and sat on the Financial Institutions and Insurance Committee and the Regulated Professions Committee, which controls the CPA profession. He's been a small business owner and is also a member of the NJCPA. Today, I'm very pleased to have Jack Ciattarelli here to answer questions important to New Jersey CPAs and in the business community. So welcome, Jack.
Ralph, it's great to be with you, and always great to be with society members.
Okay. So let's get started with a topic that impacts everyone, the pandemic. COVID-19 has moved along from a strictly public health issue to an intensely political one. Business owners, as well as individuals across the state, have strong opinions on what has become an often divisive issue. So Jack, tell me, do you support New Jersey's mandate for wearing masks in certain public settings?
Let me first say, Ralph, that I'm vaccinated. I promoted my vaccination, and I encourage people to get vaccinated. I've also said from the very beginning that the pandemic isn't easy, and we need to save lives. We know who are most vulnerable to this virus. And unfortunately, we've lost a great many New Jerseyans. I've also said throughout the pandemic, though, we have to challenge ourselves. Once we learned more about it, because in the very beginning there was a lot we didn't know. But once we got beyond that point, it's not only important to save lives, but livelihoods. And I'm sure we'll talk more about that in terms of our economy and the like.
Absolutely.
So, you know, I'm someone that's not for a vaccine mandate. I'm in charge as governor, if I win the election, when I win the election, to promote, preserve, and protect the public health, right. And I'll get all the information out there, all the science out there, and then I think people have to make their choices as to whether or not to vaccinate or not. Mm-hmm. I would encourage them to get vaccinated, but I also believe strongly that's a choice that people should be able to make. With regard to the student mask mandate, I'm all for protecting our children, but I also believe that that's a decision that should be made by parents. So again, as governor, I will promote, preserve, and protect the public health. I'll get all the information out there that people need to make an intelligent, informed decision, and then we'll leave it up to our citizens to decide.
Okay. Second question here. Do you support efforts for various businesses, colleges, and healthcare institutions to require vaccination or mandatory testing for those who won't get vaccinated?
What I support most of all is consistency. I will tell you that our son went back to college. He attends one of our state schools here in New Jersey, and the policy there was that all students had to be vaccinated, but not the faculty or staff. And that just seems to be an inconsistency to me that many people find infuriating. And then there's also less cooperation on the part of some because they're infuriated by the inconsistency. So I do believe that our employers have to decide what they think is best. I really don't support Joe Biden's recent mandate that we're going to force employers to vaccinate their employees if they employ 100 or more people. Uh-huh. I don't know what the difference is between someone that employs 105 people and somebody that employs 95 people. Mm-hmm. I think employers have to decide what works best for them and their employees. And at the same time, I don't want to see anyone lose their job. Right. So I'm not someone as governor that's going to step in between an employer and their employees in them deciding what's best for their personnel policies.
So on the same topic, you know, we have one of the best school systems in the country. What about requiring public school teachers and students to mask up?
Well, I do think the governor got this part right, that he gave teachers a choice. Teachers either have to get vaccinated or be subject to twice weekly testing. I know a lot of parents across the state are upset because they weren't given a choice. They weren't given a choice with regard to the student mask mandate. And I got to tell you, Ralph, I've read every piece of literature that's been out there, every bit of science that's been put forth. There are clinicians that say that the mask inhibits learning and adversely affects a student's intellectual and emotional development. There are other clinicians out there saying your students should be wearing masks. Again, I think this is a parental decision, and that's where I would go as governor on that.
Okay.
I do want to see our schools open, though. Our children need structure. Our children cannot afford another year of learning loss. And if you take a look at the 2020-21 school year, which completed, or the 2019-20 school year, there were schools that were open. Private schools, parochial schools, and even some public schools. I think Homedale has been a model down in Monmouth County. It was open all during the 2020-21 school year with very low incidence of the spread of virus because of precautions they took. So we need to get our kids back in school.
Okay. You recently provided us with some answers to several questions for an article in our NJCPA magazine. One question asked, what were your top 3 priorities, or what would your top 3 priorities be for the state over the next 3 years?
Day one, we need a new school funding formula here in New Jersey. And the reason why property taxes are so very high is because of the way we distribute state aid for schools. And the current formula is 13 years old. I believe it to be nefarious, arbitrary, unfair, and even unconstitutional. And so we need a new school funding formula that provides a flatter, more equitable distribution of state aids for schools. I won't leave any student behind, any community behind. I won't adversely affect the quality of our great education system and our K-12 system. But we do need a new school funding formula. We need to redefine local fair share. These are the things that we need to do to ensure a flatter and more equitable distribution of state aid for schools, Ralph. And listen, it bothers me greatly, and it bothers a great many New Jerseyans, that $1 million home in places like Jersey City and Hoboken pays less in property taxes than a $400,000 home in Toms River, my hometown of Hillsborough, or Parsippany. That shouldn't be.
Okay.
And we fixed that with a new school funding formula. So that's number one. Number two, we need to create more jobs here in New Jersey. And the way we do that is by fixing our tax code. As we all know, New Jersey's ranked year over year the worst place in the country to do business. It's got the worst business climate in the nation. We fixed that with what I think are some very fiscally responsible, but yet very, very bold reforms to our tax code. And the third thing I need to do is get down to Trenton and get my arms around that monster. It's $46 billion now, up 30% in only 4 years under Phil Murphy. $46 billion enterprise, 65,000 employees, and it needs to be downsized, modernized, and streamlined. And stop with the corruption by the special interests. If the pandemic showed anything, it's just how unresponsive our state government is to our citizens. We saw that with motor vehicles. We saw it with unemployment. We need to modernize, streamline, and downsize our state government.
So how do you really do that? I mean, that's always been a big issue, is the structure of government and the duplication, et cetera, et cetera. How do you do that? I mean, I really don't understand, because this question comes up all the time, and people say, yes, we have too much government, but at the end of the day, we don't do anything about it.
Well, Ralph, the way you do it is you put a CPA in there as governor.
Okay. Hold them accountable, right?
Hold them accountable. Listen, a journalist recently said to me in a TV interview, he said, come on, Jack. No governor gets excited about doing that. I do. I'm a hands-on CEO. That's what this state needs, a hands-on chief executive officer governor. And I tell you what we can't afford. We cannot afford political patronage when it comes to cabinet appointments. If I'm the CEO, all 15 cabinet members are executive vice presidents, and they have to go run their division. And I need to tell you what we've seen from unemployment. We've got a 43-year-old COBOL system trying to serve our citizens. And it failed miserably during the pandemic because of all the unemployment claims. People are waiting month after month. Right. Look what's going on at motor vehicles, with people waiting 5 hours online. Okay, we need to modernize. Ralph, we've got desktop systems in Treasury that are on DOS.
Yeah, I know that.
Okay. Now.
And having had a conversation with the former treasurer, treasurer in the Christie's administration.
Andrew?
Yeah, said it took him 4 months to get on direct deposit.
It took him 4 months to get on direct deposit.
And that's just incredible.
It's incredible. Yeah. So listen, I don't celebrate putting anybody on the unemployment line, but I have a responsibility to taxpayers to run a cost-efficient state government. I have a responsibility to citizens to run a government that's responsive to their needs. You know, Ralph, the University of Chicago did a study of all 50 states during the pandemic. It studied each state's responsiveness to citizens during the pandemic. Guess who came in last?
Not New Jersey.
New Jersey. We're once again last in the wrong kind of thing. No state was worse than New Jersey in terms of responsiveness to citizens. Getting somebody on the phone, the amount of time that you were on hold, getting an answer to your question, okay? And many times it's because of our systems. We need to improve our systems. We need to modernize and streamline our state government. As governor, I will.
Well, it's just incredible that, back to you saying that we're like cobalt at one point in time. I just can't understand it. But now let's turn to another hot topic, which is the public worker pension fund. Can you briefly tell us how you would address the state's huge unfunded pension liability?
Well, certainly. We've got to make a full pension payment. I mean, all those that have earned their pension to date, we need to fulfill that obligation. I mean, and what I've told people is this: I promise you, your monthly check will be there when you retire. Here's one other promise I'm going to make. I'm never going to borrow to make a full pension payment. Everyone here in New Jersey condemns Christy Todd Whitman for her pension borrowing scheme. This is exactly what Phil Murphy did last year. He borrowed $4.5 billion, and then he made a $7 billion pension payment. That's good for today's pension payment, but as we all know in the accounting profession, that's really, really bad for tomorrow's pension payment. We're not going to borrow. We just need to reprioritize our spending, and we can do it, and we can meet those obligations, and we will.
Well, staying on the topic of pensions, we all know that the public worker unions in New Jersey have tremendous political clout and are leery about discussing changes to the current pension system. That will, of course, make passing reforms very difficult. Do you think there are any areas of common ground where you could negotiate with them to achieve these reforms?
Well, let's be clear, Ralph, and I could say this, you don't have to, but when it comes to public sector unions, NJEA and CWA have clout with Phil Murphy because he worships at their altar. I actually consider him very conflicted in these areas because of the way that he has accepted donations from them and kowtowed to every one of their requests. Listen, as governor, I have a job to do. We'll sit down at the negotiation table and we'll do right by our employees, okay? But we also need to do right by taxpayers. And there's a number of different discussions that we can have with regard to how to make sure that monthly pension check is going to be there every single time, but also do right by our citizens. Listen, Ralph, the budget in Trenton is up $11 billion in Murphy's 4 years' time. It's up more than 30%. Chris Christie's last budget was $35 billion. Phil Murphy's fourth budget, which took effect this past July 1st, is $46 billion. That's $11 billion more. That's an increase of 30%. We have the financial wherewithal to make our pension obligations. We just need to reprioritize our spending in Trenton.
And one of the things that comes up, I think, every year is the whole concept of shared services or merging, townships and whatever. Shared services and combining municipalities and or school districts is one of those cost-saving measures that everyone seems to support and talk about, but it's something that never is addressed. I think Princeton and Princeton Township was one example, and then there was another example up in North Jersey, and it took them forever and a day to come to that. So how do we get there in terms of if shared services is really an opportunity for us to reduce New Jersey's overall cost structure? How do we get there? Because, well, again, people talk about it, but then when they say, oh, well, I don't want my son or daughter to go to this school or do this, what is it about that's so difficult about doing something for shared services?
Ralph, here in New Jersey, our blessing is our curse. We've got 565 towns. We've got 600 school districts. And that provides a certain kind of quaintness. And we get up close and personal with our mayor. We get up close and personal with our police chief. And but the curse that comes with all that is there's an awful lot of duplication and an awful lot of cost inefficiency. So we love home rule, but we don't like the cost that comes with it. First, property taxes are high in this state for two reasons. One is the way we distribute state aid for school. I'll do my part in Trenton with a new school funding formula. What I will do for municipalities that want to consider regionalizing or consolidating, I'll encourage it, I'll incentivize it, but I am not going to force it. I've learned the hard way. When I was a Somerset County freeholder, when they were called freeholders, I did a 2-year study to look at a regionalized police force with a north, central, and south precinct. We have 19 magnificent little police departments in Somerset County, but I thought a regional force could be a much more cost-efficient way to provide an improved quality of service. And in fact, the 2-year study proved just that. More than $90 million in savings and improved quality of service. And the vote at the very beginning of the study was 19-0 from the mayors to go ahead with the study. 2 years later, when the study was completed and it came time to implement its findings, the vote went 17-2 against me. As you know, in the 16th legislative district, I'm in Hillsborough, you're in South Brunswick, we had 15 towns. But at the end of my first term, we had 14 towns because Princeton Borough and Princeton Township decided at the local level to combine the two municipalities into one. And so many times there are significant upfront costs that serve as a deterrent to the consolidation or regionalization. You really shouldn't bond for these things. The new decal on the police car, the new tax maps.
Right.
But if you include them in the operating budget, it causes a 1-year spike that sometimes scares people away because of the 1-year spike in the tax rate. Here's what we did. The Christie administration, and I was part of this, we picked up 100%, the state did, 100% of the one-time upfront costs specific to the consolidation. I'll encourage it, I'll incentivize it, but it's got to be the locals, Ralph. That's how New Jerseyans want it.
Yeah. That is such, not being a native New Jerseyan, it was fascinating to me, the number of school districts and how the structure worked.
Yeah. But my proposition again to the people of New Jersey is this. I'll do my part from Trenton to lower property taxes. I'll give you a new school funding formula. If you want to lower property taxes all the more, you're going to have to do your part at the local level and engage in these conversations.
Okay. Let's turn to infrastructure. Assuming for a moment that a major federal infrastructure spending plan is passed, what would you do with the billions coming to New Jersey? What would your priorities be?
Number one, the Gateway Project. This project is critical to the regional economy, and the regional economy is critically important to the national economy. Second thing I would do is everything we need to do to get New Jersey transit to work. And when I say work, I mean a safe, dependable mass transit system. New Jersey Transit right now is anything but. It's not safe and it's not reliable. We need to improve our New Jersey transit system, which has been neglected for too long a time. For too long a time, we were taking money out of the capital budget, putting it into the operating budget because we didn't want to increase fares or because ridership was down. But you know what happens, Ralph, if you take money out of the capital budget. You don't do capital improvements. You don't do capital improvements, you pay the long-term price, and we're paying it right now. So those would be my two priorities, and making sure that our highway system works. An infrastructure is the backbone of a thriving economy. If our infrastructure doesn't work, our economy won't fire on all cylinders.
Okay. We have some members submitted questions now. First one, do you feel like New Jersey lawmakers understand the gravity of our state's financial situation?
If they do, they kick the can down the road. And as governor, I'll make sure that this is front and center. I do believe, Ralph, we're dying a death by 1,000 cuts, and 990 have already been administered. Another example of this is what happened recently in Fairlawn, Bergen County. Nabisco moved out. For the first time in 63 years, Oreo cookies won't be made in New Jersey, and 600 jobs went with it. And that's after Honeywell, Mercedes, even the U.S. Golf Association has moved out of New Jersey. So my gubernatorial platform is very specific on what we need to do to make New Jersey the best place in the union to do business. Every one of my ideas is fiscally responsible, reasonable, I think compelling, and will change the whole perception of New Jersey. And in so doing, will create more opportunity for the working poor that struggles to find the middle class and the middle class that struggles to get ahead.
Yes. So how do you expect to make the changes you're proposing, given that the legislature will probably remain Democratic?
Well, I'm glad the person who asked the question put the word probably in there, because as the standard bearer for the Republican Party, my job is to advocate for the 120 Republicans that are running for the legislature. 40 Senate candidates, 15 of which are incumbents, and 80 Assembly candidates, 26 of which are incumbents. And my proposition to the people of New Jersey is real simple. If you want change, you have to make a change. Give yourself something you haven't given yourself in nearly 3 decades. A Republican governor with a Republican majority. Give us a chance. Let us show you what we can do. I really do believe a common sense, conservative approach to government and public policy is exactly what New Jersey needs at this point in time. If by chance there is still a Democratic majority, Under Governor Ciattarelli, I think people that know me, Ralph, know that I'm competitive and I play to win, but the day after election, it's time to govern. And I stand by my working relationship with Democrats in the legislature. It was always very good when I was there because they always knew Jack Ciattarelli was not about the politics, he was about the policy. And so let's have these policy discussions and let's get it done.
Now I'm going to interject a question that I always ask, and you win the election. What are your priorities for the first 100 days? Like we asked with the President of the United, what will be your priority for the first 100 days?
Let me tell you what I'm going to do the first few days after the election. I'm going to go to those regions, those counties, and those cities that maybe didn't vote for Jack Ciattarelli. And I'm going to say to those people, I respect the right that you cast your vote, and it was for my opponent, but now the election's over, and I've been fortunate enough to be elected. I want to work with you to fix New Jersey. I won't wait until I'm sworn in. I will go to work right after the election. Because here's the greatest challenge, and you know this, Ralph. You get sworn in mid-January. You have to do a budget address within 6 weeks.
Yeah.
A multi-billion-dollar budget address, which will take effect that July 1st. That's not only our fiscal document, it's a policy document. And to get everything in there that I believe that we need now, I have to go to work on that document virtually the day after the election. And I and my cabinet will go to work the day after the election. We won't wait till we're sworn in. There's no time. And we need to move now. And in that first 100 days of my administration, you'll see those policy proposals in my first budget as presented to the people of New Jersey and the legislature. So that's what you're going to see most. And what, again, it's going to boil down to three things right out of the gate. Lowering property taxes with a new school funding formula. Making New Jersey a more compelling place to do business so we create more jobs. We do that with changes to the tax code and a downsized, streamlined, and modernized state government. Of course, I'll work with law enforcement to address the crime issue in our state. Crime is up. Law enforcement needs to know that I and my Attorney General have their back, and we will. And I'd also like to see us get back to basics in our public school system with our curriculum. And that includes greater emphasis on vocational training. As you know, we celebrate all the children that are going off to college, as we should. But not every one of our students needs to go to college. Many don't want to. And one of my 4 children's in the trades and does extremely well as a licensed diesel mechanic. We need to get back to vocational training in our public school system and identifying those students earlier on that should be on a vocational track. Not only is it fair to pay just as much attention to that student as we do the college-bound student, but you and I also both know industry across this state is in desperate need of people in the trades. Our economy can't take off as we continue this shortage of plumbers, electricians, welders, diesel mechanics, truck drivers. And know this, there is a severe shortage.
Oh, I know it. I had an issue at home, and I was given a date 6 weeks out for somebody to come by and take care of it. So I hear you on that. Again, you've mentioned prioritizing infrastructure. How would you make sure that New Jersey DOT is properly funded and operates efficiently?
Number one, you've got to put someone there at the top that came up through the ranks. And I promise you, every one of my cabinet members will be someone who's well respected from that sector, whether it's Department of Labor, whether it's DEP, education, DOT. It's got to be someone. We can't afford political patronage here. We can't be giving cabinet level jobs to friends or fellow party members because they raised money for us or because of this, because of that. We need people that are going to run our state government. And I will tell you, in the area of DOT, we also need somebody that's going to get these projects off the drawing board. This state has seen significant increases in the gas tax over the last 3 years and significant increases in tolls. The money's there. Get the projects off the drawing board. I don't want to hear that there was a brain drain during the Christie administration and there's not enough engineers at DOT to approve the projects to get them going. Middle-class New Jerseyans depend on those projects for work. Our economy depends on those projects to make sure that our infrastructure is working. If we need to contract out the review during the review process, but let's get the contracts out. Let's get the projects going. You talk to everybody that's intimate with the situation, they'll tell you there's major projects sitting on the drawing board despite sufficient funds.
Yeah. So Another question that has come from the audience. How are you going to reach people in the highly urban areas of New Jersey where it's crucial for you to get support in order to win the election? And what issues will you be focusing on in those areas?
Ralph, I've been very fortunate. I've won 7 elections in this state. Always been a private sector guy, owned my own business, employed fellow New Jerseyans in my medical publishing businesses, met the payroll. But I did serve 2 terms at the municipal level in the town my grandparents immigrated to 100 years ago. And I was a 2-time county freeholder in Somerset County. And then I served 3 2-year terms in the state legislature, our 16th district.
Right.
All 7 times in races where Democrats outnumber Republicans. You have to go places Republicans typically don't go. And when I do, I've always taken a very solutions-oriented, problem-solving approach to talking to voters. And the people of New Jersey have never let me down. Despite the fact that Democrats have outnumbered Republicans in each one of those races, sometimes very significantly, on Election Day, they've closed the curtain behind them and they voted for Jack Ciattarelli. I think because when you go out and talk about how you're going to solve problems, how you're going to improve people's quality of life, they'll vote for you. So you have to go places Republicans typically don't go. And anyone that follows me on social media knows that I do. That's my responsibility as a candidate. So you'll find me in Paterson. You'll find me in Elizabeth. You'll find me in Newark. Yesterday I was in Jersey City. So you got to go places people typically don't go, Republicans, and talk about how you're going to solve people's problems. That's how you do it.
Okay. In a recent article, you said you wanted to declare economic war on New Jersey's neighboring states. What do you mean by that?
So we've heard the term over and over again that we need to be regionally competitive. Mm-hmm. I need to get people's urgency up and know how serious this is. Because right now, Pennsylvania, Delaware, the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, Texas are eating our lunch. So to increase the sense of emergency with regard to what we need to do to improve our state economy and provide all of our residents an equal opportunity to progress in their careers, start their own business, get that next promotion, we need to declare economic war on our neighbors. And the tax policies that we're going to adopt here in New Jersey will all be fiscally responsible. Nothing will blow a hole in our budget, but they will make us not only regionally competitive, we're declaring economic war on our neighbors. And we need to do that. I'm tired of our neighbors eating our lunch.
Okay. So what changes would you make to New Jersey's individual and business tax structure, recognizing that they're some of the highest in the country, if not the highest in many instances, to make the state more competitive with the rest of the country?
You know, Ralph, I challenge myself when I'm on the stump out in front of large groups of people. I'll talk about the tax code. And sometimes that can bring a collective eye roll, but I actually can get people excited about the tax code, what we're going to do to it. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the business sector first. Okay. I believe we should adopt Delaware's bylaws for corporate governance. We've all heard of the Delaware Corporation, right?
Yes.
We need to adopt Delaware's bylaws for corporate governance. Let's make New Jersey the most attractive state in the union for big business. Adopt Delaware's bylaws for corporate governance, cut the corporate tax rate in half over a 5-year period. We now have what I believe is the highest corporate tax rate in the nation.
I think
when Phil Murphy increased it, he justified that because he said Donald Trump was lowering it. And some corporations said, okay, it's a push. State went up, federal came down, but along comes Joe Biden now is proposing an increase in the corporate tax rate. Where does that leave us? As an outlier. And the Nabiscos are going to continue to leave. So those 2 initiatives I think were good for big business. For small business, let's make the first $50,000 of business income tax-free. Let's not tax the gain on the sale of a family-owned business. Let's do what Vermont did in supersizing the minimum wage payroll tax deduction that we're forcing on small employers. For all New Jerseyans, let's put in place a capital gains tax rate. These are some of the things I think we can do to change the perception of New Jersey overnight. And I believe in these proposals. They're all fiscally responsible in my mind, and I also believe very, very compelling. And I've got a number of other proposals for young people and our seniors specific to property taxes.
And talking about our young people, you talked about the college environment. We are probably one of the largest exporters of high school talent out to other schools, and I believe I saw a report that 60% almost of those individuals don't come back to New Jersey. Why?
People will go where they believe they can achieve their American dream, Ralph. And a lot of young people, a lot of people, don't feel like that's the case anymore here in New Jersey. And listen, the society does a magnificent job of studying all kinds of things that are important to our economic vitality, enterprise, entrepreneurship. You just touched on one that is too well kept a secret. We do a magnificent job of graduating our K through 12 students. We've made a significant investment in them all through their K through 12 years. New Jersey leads the nation. In those students that go out of state to college, the fewest come back. What does that portend in terms of enterprise, economic vitality, and entrepreneurship? Not something very good. So we need to make New Jersey a place where people can believe they can achieve their American dream here. And for young people, I would propose that we allow them to deduct student loan interest on their New Jersey tax return. For first-time home buyers, I believe we should allow them to deduct the interest on their mortgage for the first 3 to 5 years of home ownership. This is a way of saying to young people, we want you to take root here. We can do what Missouri did, because Missouri was going through the same thing in terms of a brain drain. If you come from out of state to one of our in-state colleges, okay, if you change your residency to New Jersey and demonstrate at least $3,000 a year in earned income from New Jersey, we'll let you have in-state tuition in years sophomore, junior, and senior years. This is what other states have done. Listen, my job as governor is to at least instigate a conversation, a robust conversation about what we need to do. If you don't like my idea, you better have a counter proposal, because I'm not going to let you sit there. I'm not speaking to you, Ralph, but rhetorically you. Yeah. You can't just sit there and tell me my idea is a bad one. What's your idea to solve the problem? So I'll initiate the conversation, I'll instigate it with my ideas. If you don't like them, what's your idea? But let's do something, because the cost of doing nothing is going to continue to be this slow economic death for New Jersey.
Another question, and this is a sort of question I've always asked, is New Jersey focuses a lot on the one-year budget. Other states focus on a multi-year budget. Why is that? And I remember asking that question at an event, and the answer that I got back was, well, because that's how we do things, and it just didn't sit well with me. Would that be something that you would consider, making a multi-year budget? And I think the reason that was given to me, and I'm remembering this, is because, well, every 2 years or so, there's an election for the legislature, and that just didn't sit well with me as a great answer as to why we couldn't do a budget. I mean, businesses do budgets, and you always can change based upon what happens. Would that be something that you would consider doing, having a multi-year budget as opposed to the focus being so much on getting an annual, budget passed?
Ralph, you'll often hear from folks that run for office, we should run government more like a business. It's not a business. But in many ways, there's a strong parallel to business, and there's no reason not to do what it is that you're suggesting. I think it would give us a better indication of where we're going in terms of revenues and in terms of the future cost of new programs that we introduce. And listen, I get excited too about new programs, but we've got some old problems we haven't solved here in New Jersey. But the answer to your question is yes. And in some ways we can run government like a business, and under Governor Ciattarelli we will, and this is one area in which we will. We'll give a 2 to 3 year projection of where our budget is going from the current year budget. I think that's fair to taxpayers. I think it achieves a whole nother level of transparency. It's the right thing to do from a planning standpoint. There's a reason why major corporations do it. I was a small business. I had 30 employees, but we did it. We had a strategic plan. And we do know there are some states around the country where the legislature only convenes once a year, and they do a 2-year budget.
Yeah, so, okay. So let's talk about some incentives. What incentives or regulatory reform would you provide to companies to make New Jersey a place where they want to do business?
Well, you've heard me talk about some proposals in terms of what we do to our tax code. Listen, I know the tax code. I was a publisher of information for doctors to help them get their CE. I know that field. Here's what I always say to business leaders in any other field that I may not know well. Give me 3 reforms specific to your industry that don't harm the consumer and don't harm the environment, and you can consider me in. These could be the smallest of ideas. I was with a tobacco shop owner recently who explained to me the tobacco use tax here in New Jersey. it's 30%. Every time he buys a cigar from a manufacturer for, let's say, $10, he has to tack on 30%. Then he tacks on his margin, and then he has to tack on the sales tax. I learned from that encounter that the tobacco use tax in Pennsylvania is 0.
Didn't realize that.
And he asked me a very simple question. Did anyone in Trenton ever do the analysis that if you lowered the tobacco use tax or took it away, you'd collect more sales tax? Because I can't tell you how many people drive to Pennsylvania from New Jersey to buy their cigars.
Yeah.
Let's have these discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a reminder to our audience, if you have any questions for Jack, submit them in the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Next big topic. New Jersey is sitting on billions in federal pandemic aid. Where should these funds be used?
This is a terribly frustrating issue for a great many people in New Jersey. The governor continues to sit on billions in federal pandemic relief. And yet, one example, how it could be used, you know that as of October 1st, there will be a payroll tax increase for all employers to replenish our unemployment trust fund.
Yep.
By law, the governor is allowed to use federal pandemic relief fund to replenish the unemployment trust fund. We need $250 million. He's sitting on $4 to $5 billion in pandemic relief, and yet will not use those funds to replenish the unemployment trust fund for a payroll tax increase that is retroactive to July 1st. That's how I would do it first and foremost. That's one example. Another is with the eviction moratorium. We have $1 billion still of relief for landlords and tenants. And let's not forget, landlords are still forced to pay for property taxes, insurance, right?
Yes.
And the mortgage while people are not paying their rent. So listen, we are our brothers and sisters' keeper. There are hardship cases out there, and I want to take care of our hardship cases. But there are ways to use this federal relief fund. I also felt that the pandemic relief fund should have been used at the end of last school year to have summer enrichment programs because of all the learning loss. And I think we should now have after-school programs to make up for all the learning loss. I think that we should have helped school districts improve their air ventilation systems so that if we do get another spike in people who are virus positive, we don't have to shut down our schools, particularly our K through 5 students and our special needs students. So these are just some of the ways that I would use the federal pandemic relief. The unemployment trust fund, certainly. The relief that it's designed for landlords and tenants, making sure that our schools can continue to stay open. We've had no transparency whatsoever from the administration as to what their intentions are with the use of that federal pandemic relief.
You know, there's been a lot of discussion about duplication of efforts here in our government. Can school districts be audited for duplication of effort or for cost savings?
I think we should do audits wherever we think there's waste. But I will tell you that I don't think it's any accident that the school districts that get the greatest amount of state aid under the current formula, which again I believe is nefarious and arbitrary and unfair, it's no accident, Ralph, that those schools that get the greatest amount of state aid have a cost per pupil that far exceeds the towns that you and I live in. You're in South Brunswick,
right.
I'm in Hillsborough. If you take our budgets, our school budgets, and divide by the number of students, okay, we end up somewhere right within what I call the sweet spot. It's somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 a year per student. Okay, your district and my district gets very little aid compared to how we pay for our schools through our property taxes. Right. Those districts that get the greatest amount of state aid have a cost per pupil that will far exceed what I call the reasonable range. And so that's where we need to do audits as to how that money's being spent. And I've heard time and again from administrators that talk to me off the record from those districts that get the greatest amount of state aid that it's being wasted in a number of different ways. That's not fair to taxpayers, and certainly not fair to taxpayers in districts like ours, where we really manage our budgets very tightly.
Yeah. So please explain how a school funding policy lowers property taxes. I've always been interested in that because, like you say, living in the South Brunswick area, I think 52% of my property tax goes to schools.
Goes to schools.
And I don't have a kid in school these days. So,
well, that's why a proposal's in my gubernatorial platform specific to seniors. I talked about what I would do for young people. I'll get to the question in a second.
Okay.
But for seniors, I really do believe we should make all retirement income tax-free, as we do in Pennsylvania, as they do in Pennsylvania, rather. I don't think Social Security should be taxable under any circumstances, and I do believe in freezing property taxes for people once they hit age 65. And that's what we would do. It pains me as I go around this state, Ralph, when you come across seniors who will tell you that their property taxes today are more than their mortgage was when they bought the house 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Wow.
And they're feeling pushed out. That's not fair. That's not right. And freezing property taxes at age 65 would also be a very, very easy property tax relief program to administer. We've got all these different programs that we do. There's 4 or 5 different programs that are a pain in the neck to administer, with people pushing paperwork around in Trenton and you having to go down to the local municipal office and getting your tax return certified by the tax assessor for the... Listen, there's a way to make this easier and provide property tax relief and let seniors know that we're not going to have them pushed out of their homes. But getting back to the question.
Right.
A lot of people don't know that state income tax in New Jersey, can only be used for one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to provide state aid to schools. So $14 billion comes into Trenton through the state income tax, $14 billion goes back out in the form of state aid to our 600 public school districts. So in Hillsborough, we have, let's just say, let's make the math simple. If it's a $100 million budget, it's not, but let's make the math simple, okay? We may get, in this hypothetical, $10 million in state aid from Trenton to help us pay for our schools. That means $90 million has to be raised through property taxes. So the more state aid you get from Trenton, the less you have to raise through property taxes to pay for your schools. And the reason why the school portion of our property tax bill is so high in places like South Brunswick and Hillsborough, Toms River, Parsippany, is because we get very little state aid for schools. The more state aid you get, the less you have to raise in property taxes to pay for your schools. But we need a flatter and more equitable distribution of that state aid so that we have property tax relief throughout the state. When I said earlier in our segment that $1 million home in Jersey City and Hoboken pay less in property taxes than a $400,000 home in Toms River, South Brunswick, Hillsborough, Parsippany, it's because of the way we distribute state aid for schools. That's not fair. We need a fair system.
Yeah. Please comment on your plans for the New Jersey inheritance tax. Will it stay as it is, or do you anticipate changes to that tax? I remember when we were fighting for, tax relief, an inheritance tax, and it was at the same time as the gas tax, and that bill went through, and it was interesting because when I was down testifying before the Senate president and everything, and I mentioned to him that, one of the things that our members were at that time advising people were to leave the state of New Jersey. And I just thought, when Senator Sweeney just went like, did you hear what he said? And so like that, and I was surprised that was an issue, something that was strange to them, because that's what CPAs do. They have an
obligation to their clients.
Fiduciary responsibility to their clients to make suggestions and everything. But that was just an eye-opening moment for me, because it was almost as if, did you not know that was happening? But in any event, that was a real strange situation when I was down there, and saying, wow. Yeah, that's what our members do. They advise their clients on the best strategies to, particularly since many of them are advising people that are in retirement mode and whatever. So,
I'm a dues-paying member of the society, and I'm inactive, but I do know that CPAs take that fiduciary responsibility to their clients very seriously. It's why it's such a great profession. We did get rid of the estate tax.
Yes, the estate tax.
The one thing I was saying at the time is we all know that you can minimize the estate tax with some really excellent estate planning. Of course, the best way to avoid it back then was to move to places like Florida, and as you know, a lot of people did.
Yes.
But what I was also saying is that getting rid of the transfer inheritance tax, because it affects a great many more people and you can't avoid it, would also be just as compelling a proposal. let's have that discussion, as we should indexing our tax rates for inflation. That's another discussion that CPAs often have, right? That if we don't index our tax rates for inflation, again, our taxpayers are getting the raw end of that deal. So these are great discussions, and they're discussions I promise you that we will have under Governor Ciattarelli.
Okay. You mentioned declaring economic war on other states. Our tax agreement with Pennsylvania encourages high earners to live in Pennsylvania and low earners to live in New Jersey for those businesses near the border. Can you see this being changed at all if you were elected governor?
I can see us doing something. Our tax agreement with Pennsylvania is the complete opposite of our tax agreement with New York, and nobody knows that better than CPAs.
Yeah.
Our agreement with Pennsylvania is you pay your income tax where you live. Our agreement with New York is you pay your income tax where you work. And we've got 300,000 to 400,000 New Jerseyans pre-pandemic, and not much has changed that go into Manhattan each day and pay very little income tax to New Jersey. One of the planks of my gubernatorial platform to better compete with New York, to declare economic war on New York, is if you migrate your job to New Jersey, you'll pay no income tax in the first 12 months. Now that's a push to me. I wasn't collecting income tax from you anyway, okay? But we want people to work here and eventually pay income tax here.
Right.
And that's a financial windfall for New York that some people estimate at $2 billion a year. And so if you own a business in New York and you have 10, 20, or 30 employees that reside in New Jersey, you may be inclined now to open up a New Jersey office, because those 10, 20, or 30 New Jersey residents are going to have a complete year of tax-free income. Again, no skin off my back. I wasn't collecting income tax from you anyway. With regard to competing with Pennsylvania, we need tax simplification and fairness with our tax rates. Our top bracket under Phil Murphy is now 10.75. We all know that Pennsylvania has a flat tax of 3%. Yes. How are we going to compete? So let's have what I consider to be tax simplification and tax fairness with fewer tax brackets here in New Jersey. Again, I don't just want to compete regionally. I want to declare economic war on our neighbors. Okay.
Let's switch to minimum wage. What's your view on the minimum wage?
I felt very strongly at the time when I was in the legislature that there'd need to be an increase, and it should go at that time back when, that it go to $10 an hour and then up to $12. I did not support it being on the ballot. These are the kind of things that I think are what legislators are elected to do, not leave this kind of thing to the discretion of the public. I think recreational marijuana is a perfect example. Okay. On the surface, oh, why not? And it passed. But now the devil's in the details, and a lot of people are not liking what they see. A lot of people have buyer's remorse. I'm not so sure it would pass today. So we need to make sure there's a minimum wage that allows people to get beyond the poverty level here in New Jersey. So the minimum wage is a powerful tool, but I do think we went too far, too soon, too fast when we mandated it going up to $15. Okay. And in a way, it's kind of now driven rates even higher during this pandemic. And we've seen it all across the state. The other thing we've seen across the state, Ralph, is we have a 7.8% unemployment rate. It's one of the highest in the nation, 2 points worse than the national average. And yet everywhere you go in New Jersey, there's a help wanted sign. I mean, those two things don't go together. Mm-hmm. How can you have that high an unemployment rate and yet everywhere is a help wanted sign? And listen, again, I'm all for taking care of our people. We are our brothers and sisters keeper. Let's take care of the hardship cases. But if we make it too easy for too long, people unfortunately will take the easy way out. And here we are today with a terrible labor shortage all across the state.
Yeah. The single largest uncontrollable expense for school districts is the ever-increasing cost of health care premiums, even when pushing up to 30% of the cost back on employees. What's your stance on the health care system here?
We need to make health care more affordable. This is particularly painful for small employers. So it's not just in the public sector where we see extremely high costs for health care for our employees. We need to make sure that we have a fair system whereby they're contributing to their health care. Okay? It's got to be fair. And when I say fair, Ralph, what we can have is a public employee making $51,000 a year with less take home than a person making $49,000 a year because of the way the contribution rates are structured. Okay, there's a way to do that to make sure there's equity. But we also need to make sure, okay, that our employees have a skin in the game and that there is a portfolio, if you will, a buffet table of health insurance choices that help keep the cost down. But listen, even when we do those things, we've seen the cost of health care continue to go up time and time and time again. And all that does, if you have high deductible plans or cost sharing with employees, less money in their pocket, which is tough for the middle class New Jerseyan. So we need to get the cost of health care down, and that's a whole nother discussion. I believe we need to have greater competition here in New Jersey. Let's let out-of-state insurers sell health insurance here in New Jersey as long as they meet the adequacy requirements for their networks. Let's have better transparency. And I will tell you on Main Street, Ralph, I'm going to work very, very hard to allow small employers like I was to more easily aggregate their purchasing power to lower the cost of health insurance premiums when they want to provide health insurance for their employees. I mean, I was one of 80 small businesses on the main street of Somerville with my business. And yet, it's almost impossible for us to aggregate our purchasing power. Think of all those little businesses across New Jersey. It should be easier for them to aggregate their purchasing power to lower the premiums.
We had a similar situation here with the society. At one point, we were able to offer health care, but then I forget when that changed, but it was, I think, shortly after I came on as the CEO here. And that was one of the big things that our members wanted to try to do. So interesting. Jack, can you tell us a little more about your running mate, Diane Allen? What is her background, and why did you choose her as your choice for lieutenant governor?
I couldn't be happier, and it's been extremely well received up and down the state. Diane is as we say, a Jersey girl her entire life. She's a former Miss Burlington County. So she's been here 6 times. She won election in the state legislature. All 6 times in races where Democrats outnumber Republicans. What that tells me is that Diane is someone who transcends partisan politics. And we need that desperately here, not just in our towns, in our counties, and in our state, but throughout the country. Diane is someone who's fierce. She's going to play to win. She's someone who has stood up for women's rights all throughout her career. I've often said if there was a Mount Rushmore of New Jersey legislators, Diane would be on it. Diane was Me Too before there was a Me Too era. So she's a champion for women in that sense. She's had landmark bills named after her. And if you go on the internet, you'll find Democrats praising Diane left and right for the work that she achieved, for all that she achieved when she was in the legislature. She understands New Jersey. That's what's really important to me. I just feel very strongly that Phil Murphy is someone who's out of touch with New Jersey. Diane and I have both been here our entire lives. And I believe we understand New Jersey in every way. So I'm proud to have her on the ticket.
Good. Well, we're getting close to the end of our time here, and I guess, as I say, maybe the lightning round or the final question. How will you communicate achievements regarding your top priorities so that the common folk, the average Joe, will see the wisdom of policy decisions and or the accountability for policy errors?
Well, first and foremost, during the campaign, it comes down to going places Republicans typically don't go and just talking about what it is you plan to do to make life better for every New Jerseyan. And it's one of the reasons why I declared so early, January of 2020. So I've been on the campaign trail for close to 21 months now. I enjoy every moment of it. I enjoy getting up and down the state. But listen, I will also say to you, as a CPA, we believe in transparency. That's what we're all about. That's why we do audits, right? And
Absolutely.
so I think as governor, what you can expect from me is what you'd expect from any CPA, someone that's all about transparency. The books will not be cooked. And I just believe in transparency. It's the way to restore people's faith in government.
Okay. Well, Jack, I mean, we could sit here probably for another hour or so and talk about all of the things that we need to do to make sure New Jersey a better place. But I certainly want to take this opportunity to thank you so very much for taking time out of, well, I'm sure is a very busy schedule now that you're going to campaign trail. So any final words or comments that you would like to employee?
What your society advocates for under your leadership and with the assistance of all your dues-paying members, of which I'm one, is critically important in New Jersey. You guys are always taking a close look at what we're doing in state government with regard to our fiscal policies and making sure that we're doing right by New Jersey taxpayers and our economy. So I greatly appreciate what it is the society does. I look forward to working in partnership with the society throughout my tenure as governor.
All right.
And as busy as I may be, there's always time for the society. So thank you, Ralph.
All right. Well, Jack, thank you so much for taking time out of what is, I know, a very busy schedule to be with us today. For our audience, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, we will be posting the recording of this session on our website later this week, and have a great afternoon.